I was at the park with my niece the other day,
Eh?
and this older gentleman was sitting on a bench nearby.
Uh-huh.
And for a second, I hesitated before asking him to keep an eye on her while I grabbed her water bottle.
Oh, wow.
It was like this little voice in my head said, he's probably too old to be chasing after a toddler.
Yeah,
And instantly, I felt terrible
right.
for even thinking it.
Yeah, that's so interesting how ageism can just kind of like
Right.
sneak up on us
It really
in
can.
those little moments.
And that's what makes this deep dive so important.
Yeah.
You sent over a chapter from a developmental psych textbook,
Yes.
and it really gets into the heart of how we view aging,
Uh,
both individually and as a society.
yeah, and what's really fascinating about it is it connects those like
Right.
physical changes of aging to the cultural attitudes
Right.
and even the societal structures that can shape
Correct.
how we actually experience getting older.
So it's not just about wrinkles and gray hair.
No, not at all.
It's about understanding how ageism,
Yes.
that prejudice based solely on age,
Right.
can impact someone's life in these really profound ways.
Absolutely. And, it operates much the same way as something like racism or sexism,
Wow.
where you're reducing individuals to these broad, often negative stereotypes,
Mm-hmm.
and it limits potential and perpetuates these harmful assumptions about
Yeah.
whole groups of people.
It's like that playground incident I mentioned.
Yeah,
I was operating on this unconscious bias
right,
that older adults aren't capable of being active or engaged with children.
right.
And that's just not true.
It's so common.
It is.
And that's a perfect example of how ageism can become
Okay.
this like self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
If older adults are constantly treated as frail and incapable,
Uh-huh.
they might start to internalize that, believe it themselves,
Yeah.
become less independent, avoid new experiences, even neglect their own health.
It's almost like we're imposing these limitations on them
Yeah,
based on our own preconceived notions.
precisely. And, the chapter digs into some specific examples I think that a lot of people can relate to.
Okay.
For instance, sleep.
Okay.
We've all heard the jokes about older folks turning into pumpkins at like 8 p.m.
Oh, yeah, the early bird specials at restaurants.
Right, exactly.
But I never really stopped to think if there's any truth behind it.
Well, there is, but it's not as simple as just like being old and needing less sleep.
Okay.
Our circadian rhythms, those internal clocks that regulate our sleep-wake cycles,
Mhm.
they do shift in later adulthood. And
Right.
this can lead to earlier sleepiness and potentially more frequent waking during the night.
So it's an actual biological shift.
Exactly.
It's not just habit or choice.
Exactly. But the problem is these normal changes are often misinterpreted as insomnia
Oh,
or a sign of decline.
okay.
We expect older adults to adhere to the sleep patterns of younger adults,
Uh-huh.
which just isn't realistic.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's like we're holding them to a standard
Mm.
that doesn't align with their biological reality.
Exactly.
Listen, what about exercise?
Okay.
Is there any truth to the idea that older people should just take it easy and avoid strenuous activity?
That's another myth that needs to be debunked.
Hey.
Regular exercise is incredibly beneficial throughout life.
Right.
And that includes for older adults.
Okay.
It helps maintain physical function,
Mm-hmm.
improves cognitive health,
Okay.
and even boosts mood.
But we do see exercise rates declining as people get older.
We do.
What's behind that trend?
Well, ageism plays a big role here.
Okay.
Think about the messages older adults often receive.
Okay.
Take it easy, you'll hurt yourself, that's too much for someone your age.
Wow.
These seemingly well-intentioned warnings can actually discourage physical activity
Right.
and reinforce the idea that they're frail.
It's like we're creating this culture of fear
Yeah,
around movement and exertion for older adults.
absolutely.
And then there's the fact that a lot of fitness spaces and programs
Yes.
are really geared towards younger people.
Absolutely. It can be intimidating or even discouraging
Yeah.
for older adults to walk into a gym filled with 20-somethings pumping iron.
Right.
The chapter really emphasizes the importance of creating inclusive fitness programs and spaces that cater to the needs and preferences of older adults.
So it's about adapting exercise routines,
Yes.
offering classes specifically designed for seniors,
Right.
making sure fitness facilities are accessible.
Exactly.
Okay.
And speaking of these kind of like subtle forms of ageism, let's talk about elder speak.
Okay.
Have you ever caught yourself using it?
I have to admit, I'm a little guilty of this sometimes. Speaking more slowly and simply,
Right.
using that sing-song tone like you're talking to a baby.
Yeah.
I always thought I was being helpful.
I know it's a very common tendency, and it often stems from a good place, but
Yeah.
the reality is elder speak can be incredibly patronizing.
Wow.
It can make older adults feel infantilized and actually hinder communication.
So even if it's coming from a place of wanting to be respectful, it can have the opposite effect.
Exactly. Most older adults don't have significant cognitive impairments.
Right.
They can understand complex language just fine.
Uh-huh.
And even for those who might be experiencing some hearing loss,
Okay.
that exaggerated intonation and simplified vocabulary can actually make it harder to comprehend.
Wow. Never thought about it that way.
Yeah,
It's like we're underestimating their intelligence and treating them like children.
exactly.
Hmm.
So the key takeaway here is to treat older adults with the same respect and consideration we'd give to anyone else.
Okay.
Speak clearly, make eye contact, avoid that baby talk,
Right.
and don't assume they need things explained in a simplified way.
Okay. That's something I'll definitely be more mindful of.
Good.
Now, shifting gears a bit, the chapter also talks about the demographic shift.
Yes.
It feels like everyone knows the world's population is aging,
Uh-huh.
but I'm not sure everyone grasps the magnitude of this change.
Yeah, it's a truly transformative trend, and it's reshaping societies globally. You know, for centuries, populations have been shaped like a pyramid, with the largest number of people in the younger age groups
Right.
and a smaller number in the older age groups.
But that classic pyramid shape is changing, right?
It is declining birth rates
Yeah.
and increasing lifespans are morphing that pyramid into something closer to a rectangle.
Wow.
In many developed countries, the number of people over 65 is approaching or even surpassing the number of children under 15.
Wow. That's a pretty dramatic visual.
It is.
I imagine this shift has huge implications for everything,
Yes.
from healthcare and social security systems to housing and workforce needs.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how these demographic shifts are often presented in a way that stokes fear and anxiety,
Right.
especially among younger generations.
Or you mean those alarmist headlines about a graying tsunami
Exactly.
or a silver time bomb overwhelming societies?
Yes. And it's important to unpack those claims and look at the data objectively.
Yeah.
While the proportion of older adults is growing, it's not necessarily a crisis.
The textbook makes an important point about distinguishing between proportions and raw numbers.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. So, for example, you might hear that the number of people over 80 has quadrupled in the past 50 years.
Okay.
That might be factually accurate,
Uh-huh.
but it's misleading if you don't consider that the overall population has also increased significantly during that time.
Right.
So the proportion of people over 80 might have only doubled, not quadrupled.
It's all about context
Exactly.
and how the information is framed.
Right. It's easy to create a sense of panic when you're only looking at a small piece of the puzzle.
Right. Another example is the concern about rising healthcare costs.
Yes.
Due to an aging population.
Huh.
While it's true that healthcare needs tend to increase with age,
Right.
it's a gross oversimplification to say that older adults are bankrupting the system.
It is.
In fact, the textbook highlights that only a small percentage of people over 64 are in long-term care facilities. And even more encouraging, most elders are healthier than previous generations.
Exactly. We need to be careful about generalizations and avoid painting all older adults with the same brush.
Right.
There's a lot of diversity in aging experiences, and that leads us to another important point, the different categories of old.
Okay.
It's not a one-size-fits-all label.
So are you talking about how not every 70-year-old is the same
Exactly.
physically or mentally?
Exactly. Gerontologists often break down older adulthood into 3 categories.
Okay.
The young old, the old, and the oldest old.
Okay.
It's a way to recognize the variations in physical health, cognitive abilities, and levels of independence within the older population.
Okay, so let's break those categories down a bit.
Okay.
Who falls into each one?
So the young old, typically those between 65 and 75,
Okay.
are generally healthy, active, and financially secure. They might be retired, but they're still very engaged in their communities and often caring for others.
They're the ones breaking all those ageist stereotypes.
Absolutely. Then we have the old, usually those over 75,
Okay.
who might be experiencing some physical or cognitive decline, but they're still largely self-sufficient.
And lastly, there's the oldest old.
Yes. This group is typically over 85
Okay.
and more likely to need significant assistance with daily tasks.
Okay.
They may have more complex health issues and require more intensive care.
But even within that group, there's a wide range of experiences, right?
Absolutely. Chronological age is an imperfect predictor of health and ability.
Right.
We have centenarians, people over 100 years old,
Wow.
who are still remarkably healthy and independent. And on the flip side, someone in their 60s might face significant health challenges.
Right.
Aging is not a uniform process.
It sounds like a key takeaway here is that we need to ditch those monolithic notions of old age.
Yes.
And appreciate the incredible spectrum of experiences that fall under that umbrella.
I couldn't agree more, and that brings us to another fascinating area. How older adults adjust to the physical and social changes that come with aging.
Okay.
The chapter focuses on 3 key areas where adaptation is often required.
Okay.
Sex driving and the senses.
Okay, now we're getting into some really interesting territory.
Yes.
Let's dive into those areas after a quick break. All right, so we're back and ready to tackle those 3 areas. You mentioned sex driving and the senses.
Right.
These are definitely topics where ageist stereotypes run rampant.
They really do, and I think it's important to approach these conversations with sensitivity and a willingness to challenge those preconceived notions.
Absolutely. Okay, let's start with sex.
Okay.
There seems to be this widespread assumption that older adults just lose interest or are physically incapable.
That's such a pervasive myth, and frankly, it's pretty dehumanizing.
It is.
The reality is, sexual desire and activity can and do continue well into later life.
Okay.
Research shows a lot of individual variation, of course, with some older adults remaining sexually active, while others might choose different forms of intimacy.
So it's not just about frequency of intercourse.
No.
There's a broader spectrum of what constitutes a fulfilling sex life.
Precisely, the chapter highlights how important it is to recognize those diverse forms of sexual expression.
Okay.
Kissing, cuddling, caressing, even fantasizing.
Yeah.
These can all be incredibly fulfilling regardless of age.
Right.
And for many older couples, these forms of intimacy might become even more meaningful as their relationship evolves.
I remember reading a case study in the chapter
Oh, yeah.
about how older couples redefine their sexual lives.
Yes.
It was based on interviews with couples in their 50s all the way up to their 80s.
That's a really interesting study.
It is.
What's fascinating is how it highlights the social construction of sexuality.
Okay.
The researchers found that while intercourse might become less frequent with age, many couples reported that their sex lives had actually improved.
Hold on, really?
Yes.
Improved.
Yes. How so? Well, it seems like these older couples had moved beyond those narrow definitions of good sex. That often focused solely on intercourse and performance.
Yeah.
They talked about deeper emotional connection,
Okay.
increased intimacy, and a greater appreciation for their partner's needs and desires.
That's beautiful, actually.
It is.
It's like they've shifted their focus from physical prowess to emotional intimacy.
Exactly. And that seems to be a key factor in maintaining a satisfying sex life as we age.
Oh.
It's about adapting, communicating, and finding new ways to connect with our partners.
Okay, let's move on to driving, another topic that tends to get framed negatively when we talk about older adults.
You're right. There's a lot of fear-mongering around senior drivers.
Yeah.
But once again, it's crucial to move beyond those generalizations.
The chapter does acknowledge that some age-related changes can affect driving ability.
Right.
Things like slower reaction times, decreased visual acuity, and less flexibility.
Right. But those changes don't automatically make someone a dangerous driver.
Okay.
Older adults often compensate for these declines by driving more cautiously, avoiding busy times and challenging conditions.
And sticking to familiar routes.
But there are certainly cases where driving becomes unsafe,
Yes.
even with those compensations. So what's the solution?
Well, the chapter pushes back against the idea of simply taking away the keys.
Right.
It advocates for a more nuanced approach that recognizes the importance of driving independence for older adults while also addressing safety concerns.
So what would that look like in practice?
Yeah.
Are we talking about more frequent driving tests for older adults?
More robust license renewal procedures could be part of it.
Okay.
Instead of just renewing by mail, older adults could be required to undergo more thorough testing that assesses not only their knowledge of traffic rules,
Okay.
but also their actual driving skills.
The chapter even mentions the use of driving simulators.
Yes.
Which sounds pretty high tech.
Their simulators can be incredibly useful in evaluating driving ability,
Okay.
especially for older adults who might have experienced a stroke or other neurological changes. They provide a safe, controlled environment to assess reaction times, decision-making, and overall driving competence.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But beyond individual assessments, I imagine the environment itself plays a role in driving safety
Absolutely.
for everyone, including older adults.
The chapter highlights the concept of macro system compensation,
Okay.
which basically means adapting the environment to better support older drivers.
Give me some examples of that.
Okay.
What kind of changes could make a difference?
Think about larger road signs, brighter street lighting, clearer lane markings, and traffic signals that provide more time to react.
Uh-huh.
These seemingly small changes can significantly reduce accidents and make driving safer for everyone, not just older adults.
It's like the idea of universal design.
Exactly.
Environments and products should be accessible to people of all ages and abilities.
Exactly. Designing with inclusivity in mind benefits everyone.
Okay.
Now let's talk about our senses,
Okay.
specifically vision and hearing, which we know tend to decline with age.
The chapter dives into how these changes impact daily life
Okay.
and what we can do to mitigate the challenges.
I think we often underestimate the impact of sensory loss.
We do.
It's not just about missing a few words in a conversation or needing a stronger reading light.
Right.
It can really affect someone's quality of life, their ability to connect with the world, and even their cognitive function.
That's such an important point. The chapter actually highlights the link between untreated hearing loss
Wow.
and increased risks of social isolation, depression, and even dementia.
That's a scary thought.
It is.
Early detection and intervention seem crucial.
They are regular hearing and vision screenings become even more important as we age.
Right.
And thankfully, we have lots of effective interventions available today.
Like hearing aids and glasses. I know technology has advanced a lot of those areas.
It has, but the chapter goes beyond those individual solutions
Okay.
and emphasizes the role of the exosystem,
Okay.
the broader societal structures and technologies that can support sensory adaptation.
So are we talking about things like closed captioning on TVs,
Yes.
hearing loops in public spaces,
Yeah.
and better lighting in buildings?
Exactly. And then there are incredible technological advancements like cochlear implants for profound hearing loss.
Wow.
And new treatments for eye conditions like macular degeneration. It's encouraging to see progress in these areas.
It really is, knowing that even with age-related sensory decline,
Yeah.
there are ways to stay engaged with the world and prevent those negative downstream consequences is hopeful.
It is. And that brings us to another important distinction that the chapter makes.
Okay.
The difference between primary and secondary aging.
Okay.
It helps us understand why some people seem to age more gracefully than others.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What exactly is the difference between these two types of aging?
Primary aging refers to those universal biological changes that occur to all living creatures as we get older.
Okay.
Think wrinkles, gray hair, slower metabolism, and decreased organ reserve.
Uh-huh.
These are inevitable, a natural part of the life cycle.
So it's like the baseline of aging.
Yes.
The stuff we all experience to some degree.
Exactly. Now, secondary aging is more about individual variation.
Right.
It encompasses those age-related changes that are influenced by genetics, lifestyle choices, environmental factors, and even societal conditions.
So you saying things like smoking a poor diet, lack of exercise, chronic stress, and even exposure to pollution can speed up the aging process and increase the risk of disease?
Exactly. And that's where the concept of compression of morbidity comes in.
Okay.
It's the idea that we can shorten the period of illness and disability
Yeah.
that often precedes death by focusing on prevention and early intervention.
I'm starting to see how empowering this distinction is.
Yeah.
Even though we can't stop primary aging,
Right.
we could take steps to minimize secondary aging and live healthier, more vibrant lives for longer.
That's the heart of it. The chapter highlights how understanding this difference empowers individuals and societies to make choices that promote healthy aging. It's not just about adding years to life, but adding life to those years.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious about the why behind all of this.
Yeah.
Why do we age in the first place?
Right.
The chapter presents a few different theories, right?
It does. It delves into three main clusters of theories: wear and tear, genetic, and cellular.
Okay.
It's like trying to solve this complex puzzle with multiple pieces.
Okay, let's start with the wear and tear theory.
Okay.
It seems pretty intuitive.
Oh.
Our bodies are like machines that wear out over time from use.
That's the basic premise, and it makes sense on the surface.
Right.
But the chapter points out that while this theory is appealing in its simplicity,
Uh-huh.
it doesn't fully explain the complexities of aging.
So it's not as simple as our bodies just rusting out like old cars.
Right. While certain body parts can experience wear and tear from overuse or injury, we also know our bodies are incredibly resilient and capable of repair.
Okay.
They can regenerate themselves to a remarkable degree.
That's good to know. Are there any real-world applications of the wear and tear theory, even if it's not the whole picture?
The chapter highlights research on calorie restriction and intermittent fasting.
Okay.
Studies show that reducing caloric intake can actually extend lifespan in various organisms.
Wait, are you saying eating less can help you live longer?
It's not quite that simple,
Okay.
but the research is certainly intriguing.
Okay.
Calorie restriction typically involves a carefully controlled reduction in calories while still maintaining good nutrition,
Right.
and intermittent fasting alternates periods of eating and fasting, which might have similar benefits.
Sounds like a pretty big lifestyle change.
It is.
I'm not sure how many people would be willing to restrict their eating that much, even if it means living longer.
You're right. It's not for everyone, but it does offer some insights into how we might be able to influence the aging process
Uh-huh.
through manipulating metabolic processes.
Okay, let's move on to the genetic theories of aging.
Okay.
Is our lifespan predetermined by our genes?
There's definitely a genetic component to aging.
Okay.
The chapter talks about maximum lifespan,
Yep.
the upper limit of how long a species can live under ideal conditions.
Uh-huh.
For humans, that seems to be around 122 years,
Wow.
based on the oldest documented person who ever lived.
That's incredible. But within that species-specific limit, our individual genes play a role, right?
Yeah.
Some people are just genetically predisposed to live longer and healthier lives.
To some extent, yes. But it's important to remember genes aren't destiny.
Okay.
Lifestyle choices and environmental factors also play a significant role.
So even if you have good longevity genes, you can still sabotage your health with bad habits and an unhealthy environment.
Absolutely. It's that constant interplay of nature and nurture.
Okay, let's dive into the final cluster of theories, cellular aging.
Okay.
What are we looking at here?
These theories delve into the microscopic level,
Okay.
examining how changes within our cells contribute to the aging process.
Uh-huh.
A key concept is the Hayflick limit, which refers to the finite number of times a cell can divide before it stops replicating.
So it's like our cells have a built-in expiration date.
In a way, yes. As cells approach this limit,
Wow.
they become less efficient at repairing damage and maintaining their normal functions.
Okay.
This cellular senescence is thought to contribute to many age-related changes and diseases.
The chapter also talks about telomeres,
Yes.
those protective caps at the ends of our chromosomes,
Right.
and their role in cellular aging.
Right. Telomeres shorten each time a cell divides.
Huh.
And when they get too short, the cell can no longer replicate.
And here's where those lifestyle factors we discussed earlier come back into play, right?
Yes.
Things like chronic stress, smoking, and a poor diet can actually accelerate telomere shortening.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even though aging has a genetic component,
Uh-huh.
our choices and environments make a difference.
So what's the big takeaway from all these theories?
Yeah.
Do we have a definitive answer to why we age?
Unfortunately, no aging is incredibly complex, influenced by a web of genetic, cellular, environmental, and lifestyle factors.
So the puzzle is still being pieced together.
It is, but the research is moving forward rapidly, and with every new discovery, we gain a deeper understanding of those biological mechanisms that drive aging.
Okay.
And hopefully, this knowledge will lead to new ways to slow down the process and promote healthy longevity.
Well, I have to say, this deep dive has already shifted my perspective on aging.
Good.
I'm feeling more informed and maybe even a little more optimistic.
That's great to hear.
But we've covered a lot of ground, so let's recap the key takeaways
Okay.
and talk about what this all means for us moving forward. So we've explored ageism, debunked some common myths, and even delved into science of why we age.
Yeah.
What are the key takeaways that stand out to you from all of this?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that aging is not this monolithic experience of decline and deterioration.
Okay.
It's a diverse and dynamic process shaped by biology, psychology, and our social context.
It's about challenging those ageist assumptions that really limit our understanding and create unnecessary barriers.
Yes.
I mean, think about that playground example I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
My own bias almost prevented me from interacting with that older gentleman.
Yeah, and we need to recognize the incredible resilience and adaptability of older adults and move away from those deficit-based models that focus solely on what's lost.
The chapter really emphasized the importance of selective optimization with compensation.
Right.
Can you remind us what that means?
Yeah, so it's a powerful framework for thinking about how we can age successfully.
Okay.
It's about recognizing our limitations as we get older, but also identifying our strengths and finding creative ways to adapt to the challenges that come with aging.
So instead of dwelling on what we can no longer do, we focus on what we can still do and find ways to work around those limitations.
Exactly.
Things like that.
And it's not just about individual effort. Societies need to step up and create environments that support healthy and fulfilling lives for people of all ages.
What would that look like in practice?
Think about accessible transportation, age-friendly, housing-inclusive fitness programs, and technologies that enhance communication and social connection.
Right.
These things can make a world of difference in promoting independence, well-being, and longevity for older adults.
So it's about creating a world where people can age in place.
Yes.
Surrounded by community and support, and with access to the resources they need to thrive.
Exactly. And honestly, who wouldn't want that?
Right.
Regardless of age, it's about creating a more inclusive and equitable society for everyone.
So what does all of this mean for us as individuals and as a society?
Yeah.
What's the message we should carry with us from this deep dive?
For me, it's about embracing the journey of aging with intention, curiosity, and a healthy dose of rebellion against those ageist norms.
I like that.
We need to challenge those negative stereotypes.
Right.
Celebrate the wisdom and experience that comes with age. And create a world where growing old is not something to be feared, but something to be anticipated and embraced.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
You know, I went into this deep dive with a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
And maybe even some anxieties about aging. But I'm coming out of it feeling more informed and empowered.
That's what we hope for.
It really is.
Remember, this deep dive is just the beginning.
Right.
There's a wealth of information out there about aging, and I encourage you to keep exploring. Don't let those ageist assumptions limit your possibilities.
Absolutely. And one final thought for our listeners to ponder.
Okay.
How can you use what we've talked about today to challenge ageism in your own life?
Yeah.
And create a more inclusive and supportive environment for older adults in your community?
That's a great question.
It starts with awareness, but it also requires action.
I love that challenge. We all have a role to play in creating a more age-friendly world.
Thanks for joining us on this incredibly insightful deep dive.
It's my pleasure.
And remember, we're all aging every single day. Let's make it a journey worth taking.